Disciple maker. Last week we talked about the mind of a disciple maker, how it's important for us to be growing in our knowledge. And that's really one of the goals of this study, is to get to the point where we not only grow in our knowledge, but grow in our skill and our ability to use that knowledge to talk to other people about the gospel. But before you do that, not only do you have to have the right knowledge, you've also got to have the right heart. Okay? You can have people that have all the knowledge in the world. And there are people in the church who have, they have the knowledge, they have the skill set, but maybe they don't have the heart. They don't have the compassion. They don't have the desire. They don't have really what it takes to be a disciple maker, not because of the knowledge, but just because they don't have the confidence in God, the love for God and for their fellow man. And so that's what we want to think about tonight. Think about the heart of a disciple maker and the importance of faith and love. The Christian is called to make disciples, So what's the danger of doing this just because it's commanded, though it's disconnected from our hearts? Does that make sense?
Two or three things maybe, but one, if you aren't really dedicated to it, not going to be sincere, half-hearted, and that comes across with people that you don't really care, you're doing it because you have
Okay. Yeah, doing it because we have to, not because we want to. Matthew 15, verse 7 says this: "Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." It's possible to be a people who say the right things and who honor God with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Teaching in vain, it says they worship me, teaching his doctrines, the commandments of men. So what would be some examples of people who, when it comes to evangelism, are just kind of going through the motions? Going through the motions of evangelism. Okay. We can be teaching the right things, but maybe the Pharisees didn't seem to actually have a heart for lost sinners. But maybe they were saying some of the right things. Okay. Well, let me mention a couple of things to you, right? I think these are some things that I've heard through the years. You know, if I was to ask maybe an individual or ask a church, well, what are you guys doing for evangelism? You know, what are you doing? Well, and somebody says, well, the church has a couple gospel meetings a year. That's our evangelism. 2 times a year, we have a gospel meeting. What about the other 50 weeks of the year? What are you doing for evangelism? Because I didn't think evangelism was just like a 2-week-a-year thing, right? But for a lot of churches, that's their evangelism. We had a family come to us when I was in Indiana. They were in a different congregation, and they had just moved into that area. They worshiped with this other congregation for about a year, and they had asked the elders of that congregation, "What are we doing for evangelism? It doesn't seem like we're doing anything. We just come, worship, go home. That's kind of it." And well, we write a check to this organization. It was an institutional church where they were from. We write a check to World Video Bible School once a year, and they send out people. Well, that's what are we doing in this city in Indiana for evangelism? I mean, ignore the whole fact that you shouldn't be sending money to a middleman organization to go do the work of the church in the first place, but you know, what are we doing here? If all we're doing here is we write a check for evangelism, and that's not the type of evangelism that I think the scriptures would encourage. So sometimes what I'm trying to say, we go through the motions of things like that. Or we pay the preacher to do our evangelism. We have 2 gospel meetings a year for evangelism. I hit the share button. You know, when there's a sermon, I hit the share button. And that's great, because some people don't even hit the share button. So I'm glad you hit the share button. But if that's all we're doing when it comes to evangelism, Are we just kind of going through the motions to say we did something, or are we really interested in evangelism? No, go ahead, Pat.
When I think of evangelism, I think of it, I guess, more as an individual thing, because I think about what can I do, what am I going to do? And that's not what you're asking, though, so that's why I'm not answering. You're asking, what is the church doing? And mostly for the gospel meetings, most people invite other Christians that they know, instead of neighbors, those that are not Christians that need to hear it. And a lot of our lessons for those meetings are for Christians rather than for non-Christians.
Yeah. And when I say, what's the church doing? Well, the church is made up of individuals. So, yeah, there's a sense in which this is what the church is doing, but also, what are we as individuals doing? And if all we say we're doing is, well, my church has 2 gospel meetings a year, we stuffed envelopes and we sent out flyers to all the other churches. Again, if we're having a gospel meeting and we send it out to people who are already believers, and that's that's not evangelism. That's asking people to come here and get encouraged, I guess. And if, in my experiences, and a lot of gospel meetings that I've experienced here, and in most of the churches I've visited for gospel meetings, it's usually all believers who are there. So I wonder if we have the right mindset and mentality. Now, if we bring in a speaker and say, hey, we want you to help our local church, then maybe we don't need to be inviting non-members and things like that. But if we're going to have a gospel meeting where we want the lost to hear the gospel, shouldn't we be doing whatever we can to invite lost people, unchurched people, to come and hear the message? And that doesn't mean sending flyers to churches, but actually getting out and talking to our friends and compelling them to be part and to take part, maybe in these studies, if that's one way we want to do it. I guess one way I describe it is this. If I was a single guy and I wanted a date, would I just send out a message on my social media page, say I'm single, if anybody's interested, let me know? You might. Or would you actually find someone you might be interested in going out on a date with and specifically having a conversation with them and trying to convince them to go out with you? Do you see the difference? One is probably not going to be super successful. You might get a random, every squirrel gets a nut, but you might get a random person every once in a while that would respond to that, and that's great. You share the gospel meeting and all that. You might get somebody to come with you, great. But personal invitations and taking it personally and actually talking to our friends and neighbors, seems to be more of what I'm trying to get at. It seems to be more sincere, that I'm really trying to get people to come and hear the gospel or to study with me and that sort of thing. So I'm afraid sometimes we're just going through the motions. We've always had 2 gospel meetings a year. We're going to keep having 2 gospel meetings a year. That's what we do. That's how we evangelize. We're very evangelistic. We have 2 gospel meetings a year. And we need to look at evangelism as not just a twice a year thing, an everyday thing, and every opportunity, and every time I get a chance to have a conversation with an unbeliever thing. So we have to change that mentality a little bit. Now, what's going to help motivate us to do some of this? Well, a few questions, all right? Let's think about faith, first of all. How is faith in God's trustworthiness important to the work of making disciples? There's a phrase that's in 1 Corinthians 1:9. It's also in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. It's this phrase: God is faithful. God is faithful. So how does understanding that God is faithful important to the work of making disciples?
He has promised.
Well, go ahead, and then Laura will jump in. Go ahead, Pat.
To me, he has promised eternity for those who are Christians and do his will, and hellfire for those who haven't. If I look at those people around me that aren't Christians, if I will realize that's a soul that's lost. And I think we don't enough. We just think, oh, well, that's a nice person. I enjoy talking to that person, rather than that's a lost soul.
I think that's good. We need to change our mentality about when we talk to people. This is somebody that if I don't share the gospel with them, they may be lost eternally. And I don't want that to be on me. So I want to try to talk to people that I have the chance to talk to when I have the opportunity. Laura.
I answer this question right? But I kind of jumped ahead and was thinking along the lines of the point you made later in the lesson about understanding that God is the one that provides the increase. And we can, plant the seed, but it's ultimately not, it's not about us and us spreading the gospel, it's about the gospel. The word of God.
Good. And we're headed to that concept that we need to have trust that if God has said, if you sow the seed, there will be good and honest hearts who hear it, and it will yield fruit. I need to have faith in that God has promised that, God has said that. And if God has said that that's true, then that's what's true. Now, stay here with this question, though. Take a look at 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 12, and then go ahead and look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 9 through 11, just a couple passages. And what I'm trying to draw out of these two passages is that our God is a God who keeps his promises. So in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 12, Paul says, "For this reason I suffer these things." Now he's suffering as an evangelist. And he says, "Nevertheless, I am not ashamed, because I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep what I have committed to him until that day." Now, I think what God had committed to Paul was that one day Paul would be saved eternally, would be in heaven. That's what he's looking forward to. God has promised that. And if I'm faithful to him, he's one day going to reward me. So even if I have to suffer, even if they throw me in prison, even if things get difficult for me, I know God is going to keep his promises, and God is going to reward the faithful. Take a look at the 2 Corinthians chapter 5 passage, and in verse 9. It says, "Therefore we make it our aim, whether present or absent, to be well-pleasing to him." Why do you want to be well-pleasing to God? Because you believe God is faithful. And ultimately, verse 10 tells you why we want to be well-pleasing, because we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. And knowing, therefore, verse 11, the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. But we are well known to God, and I also trust are well known in your consciences. So Paul believed that God was faithful, and that God was faithful when it came to his promises. And that means that if you were to be obedient to the Lord, he would reward you. But if you choose to not obey, then you will be punished. He says, we know the terror of the Lord, and that's why we persuade men. We believe in who God says that he is. And God is a God who has told us that there's going to be a judgment and a day of reckoning, and we need to be prepared for that. And Jesus is the way for that judgment to be positive. So we need to trust in his promises. Now, moving on to the point kind of Laura brought up, question 3 there. How is faith in the power of the gospel important to the work of making disciples? What's Romans 1, 15 through 17 say? Somebody want to read that for us. Romans 1, 15 through 17.
So for my part, I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to you first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith.
Why don't some people evangelize more? What are some of the things they say about the gospel or its effectiveness in our culture that would perhaps indicate to you that maybe they don't have much faith? Deborah, would you? No?
People aren't interested,
People are interested. So why even?
interested in hearing.
Right. Sometimes the reason why we say I don't want to share the gospel with people is, well, they're not interested, or kind of this whole attitude of the gospel doesn't really do much good anymore. It's not going to do any good. That wasn't the mindset of Paul. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes. So the heart of a disciple maker has to be a heart of faith, a heart that believes in who God is, and that he's going to keep his promises. And that motivates us to want to tell our friends and neighbors about him. But also somebody who realizes that God has said that his word is powerful. As 1 Corinthians chapter 3 says, in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 5 through 7, Paul says here, verse 5, who is Paul? Who is Apollos? But ministers through whom you believed, as the Lord gave to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. So I look at these two passages. First of all, you got to have faith in the power of the gospel, that it is effective. And that doesn't mean everyone's going to receive it or accept it. It will get rejected from some people. It did with Paul, clearly. But you have to have some faith that if you'll preach it, you can do some good. But also faith that even with people who are not perfect, like all of us, like Paul and like Apollos, God can still do something with us if we're just willing to let him use us as seed planters. In thinking about seeds, why do you plant a garden? Well, you have faith that seed that you put into that soil, that it's going to grow and it's going to become a plant. You're going to get a crop from it. You have faith in the seed. If you have faith in God, you have faith in what he says the gospel can do, then you're going to take that seed and you're going to be willing to put it in people's hearts and share with people. But if you're going to make disciples, it starts there. It starts with understanding. You got to have the right knowledge, but also have to have faith and confidence in God's will. So faith's a big part of what we try to accomplish. Now let's think about love. Think about love. How is the love for God important to the work of making disciples? It's Matthew 22, 37, 38 says. It's a key thing, right? Okay. First and great commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul, all your strength. Love the Lord your God. And so if I love the Lord my God, I want to share my God with other people. But I also want to share his promises with other people. So what's going to be our attitude toward God's commandments when we have a loving relationship with him? What's 1 John 5 and verse 3 say? 1 John 5 and verse 3. If anybody's there, go ahead and read it. My voice is not great tonight either. So you... Okay. This is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. It's one of his commandments. Go to all the world, preach the gospel to every creature, go make disciples of all nations. This is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. You say that you love God. One of the things he wants you to do is to share him and to share his son with other people. So we're going to feel compelled to do that. Look at 2 Corinthians 5, 14 and 15. 2 Corinthians 5. Good to see you back, Jimmy, by the way. 2 Corinthians 5, 14 and 15. What else compels us? Not just the terror of the Lord, which we read in verse 11, but when you read verses 14 and 15, there's actually two things in 2 Corinthians 5 that Paul says are motivation for him to evangelize. Josh, can you get that one for us? Mm-hmm.
For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. He died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised.
Okay. The love of Christ compels us or controls us. So earlier, knowing the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. Verse 14, the love of Christ compels us to share Jesus who died for all with other men. Now, what's part of love? If we think about what that word love means, how do we define that sometimes? That agape love.
Is this talking about Christ's love for us or our love for Christ?
Are you talking about the 2 Corinthians 5 passage? The love of Christ compels us. I think it's Christ's love for us that motivates us. It's a motivating factor for us. When you define love, how do you define agape? I'm sure you guys have heard plenty of lessons on agape, philia, all that stuff, right? What is agape love?
Loving someone so that you want the best for them.
You want the best for someone else? Okay. And you do the best for them? Okay.
It's agape love that's sacrificial, right?
Right. Sacrificial love. Unconditional, sacrificial love. That's agape love. All right. In order to show our love for God and our love for other people, I think just that definition is helpful. If I have the heart of a disciple maker and I love God, I'm going to be willing to sacrifice whatever I need to sacrifice to do His will. And if His will is for me to go talk to people about the gospel and share the gospel with other people, I'm going to be willing to sacrifice my pride, sacrifice my time, sacrifice my money, sacrifice whatever I've got to sacrifice in order to help that work to be done. I've also got to sacrifice a little bit of me, though, if I'm the one doing it. James chapter 4, verse 7 talks about submit yourselves to God, and then it talks about humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up. We've got to humble ourselves. And Jesus provides an example of that type of humility. When He came to earth, His example is the ultimate example for us. Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. Philippians 2, verse 5. I've got the New King James that I'm reading from. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. I've got to learn to think like Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but He made Himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, coming in likeness of men. Jesus came to earth. He came to earth to serve. And being found in appearance as a man, He humbled Himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. And so therefore God has highly exalted Him and given Him the name which is above every name. All right? When Jesus came to earth, He shows us that example of humility. I'm willing to be obedient. Whatever the Father's will is for me to do, that's what I'm willing to do. Even if people hate me for it, I'm willing to do it. And that has to be part of our mentality as well, if we want to make disciples. So what are the sacrifices we have to make to do this work? Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2 talks about how we have to be living sacrifices. What are some sacrifices we're going to have to make to try to do the work so the work can be done?
We have to transform ourselves to people that go to other people. We might have to change our lifestyle, our time.
Okay, change your lifestyle. Be the type of person someone would want to hear the gospel from. I mean, people need to see your transformed character if you're going to expect them to have a transformed character. So that's a sacrifice in and of itself. Be the person that you're trying to help other people become. It's hard to evangelize when you're not living the life yourself. Sacrificing your time, I think you mentioned too, though. It means we've got to take an intentional effort. We talked last week about that might mean we've got to take more intentional effort to study and to build the knowledge base so that we're prepared to talk to our friends and neighbors about questions or topics that they need to consider, talk to them about the gospel. We've got to study how to talk to people about the gospel so we can meet them where they are. So that's going to take time. That's going to take a sacrifice. What else?
Get you out of your comfort zone, I think, going out to try to reach people. Even people you might know how to start the conversation. All these fears we have, will they reject it and don't want to be friends with me anymore? Well, we should do that even if that's the outcome, because we need to serve God rather than ourselves or our friends or anything like that. I think that stops a lot of people. Just, it's not comfortable to tell them something that you're not sure you're going to have all the right answers for, or you're not sure they're going to accept it, or, you know, the unknown there.
It's a lot easier to just talk about the weather and the big game. And yeah, when you start talking about the gospel with people, you know that not everybody's going to react to that real right. And so you have to get out of your comfort zone and sacrifice to a degree, maybe your reputation. They may think totally different of you after that. I mean, I've had people that all of a sudden and then you start talking about the gospel, and then they want nothing to do with me after that. Of course, it works the other way as well. Sometimes people get excited to talk about it, so you never know until you get into the conversation. But you got to be willing to sacrifice that. And I think sometimes we're a bit prideful. That's maybe why we don't want to have those conversations, is because we don't want people to think we're weird because we're having those conversations. Sacrifices you have to be willing to make. Good Samaritan, I think, could be a helpful example, perhaps. You know, the Good Samaritan sees someone who's in need on the side of the road. What does he give in order to help this person who's on the side of the road? If we're thinking about this maybe on a spiritual level. What's he?
Time.
Gives him time. Yeah, he just took the time. I mean, when you notice people are not living lives that are a wreck or disaster, and you know what? The Lord could help you. If you just listen to me for a minute, I really think if you start doing things the Lord's way, He could really help you. He could give you some hope if you're depressed and down. He could help you in your marriage if you and your spouse would actually get on board with doing things the way Jesus says. He could help you in your family. A lot of things you're dealing with. He could help you with your addictions and your sin problem that you're having if you start doing things the Lord's way. He can help you. But it takes time. It takes time to just stop and notice and be willing to say that to somebody. What else? What else does he do? Good Samaritan. Supplies and money. And so, I used the illustration earlier. Sometimes there are some churches who have the mentality, well, we give our money and then the church just pays evangelists. And it's not a everybody on board mentality. It's just kind of we let the evangelists do that and that's it. And I wasn't trying to put down the idea of giving money by itself, because there are some things that we're able to do evangelism-wise that because there's funding to do it, they get done. We support other preachers. We support Ed. I mean, I don't think you have however many baptisms there were last year overseas with Ed if there aren't churches who support it for him to do that work. So money is an aspect that can be helpful. It's one way we can help. And there are people who I think feel like I just don't have the mind or the ability or the contacts. I know people that are just home all day and they don't get out and talk to anybody. So, but they can support the gospel with money. And the Good Samaritan did that.
Sometimes it's money we spend for ourselves to buy good books, commentaries, study aids. Someone told me one time that some training was getting, said knowledge is power and confidence. If you're on the scene somewhere and you've been trained, you know what to do.
Yep. That's very true. You got to read. Just leaders are readers. And so the more you read, the more equipped you are. And so sometimes that means buying resources, for sure. I spend a lot of money on books per year. My Amazon cart's always got books waiting. Sometimes I can't afford them. They just sit in the safe for later. But, always buying books. Don't even read half of them. I just get them. I'm like, I'm going to need that someday. So I'm just going to use it at the right moment. Mm-hmm.
I think we can also see an example of him having, and us having the agape love mindset, because he loved mankind enough to risk his well-being and to go out of his comfort zone on a dangerous road to help someone that was in need.
Sometimes it means putting yourself in a dangerous situation too. Yeah, you don't know if you could have got hijacked. One of our elders, when I was at Anderson, he had just retired a couple of years before I got there. He was an electrician, and he went to Columbia every year. For 2 weeks he would go to Columbia. He had a translator down there, and he'd started going with another preacher for a few years. He would use his vacation to go do that for 2 weeks, and then he started going on his own once he got used to it. And he told me a couple times, he's like, there's a couple of places if my wife knew where I was, she wouldn't be very happy. But, they need the gospel there. They're like high security. The U.S. government says don't go here, but they need the gospel there. So we're going to go there. He's been out in the bush on a boat right in the middle of the rainforest. Crazy. Crazy. But you cannot deny the fact he loves souls. He loves sharing the gospel. And he wanted to use the opportunity to do it. And his mentality was, if I get taken out doing that, I'm going to go to heaven, so I don't care. I don't care if it's dangerous. It doesn't bother me. And sometimes we have to be willing to do dangerous things. I'm sure Ed could probably tell you some stories too. Obviously, even this past year, he had to get out of Burundi, was it? Because it got dangerous in that area. All right. How's being devoted to the Father's will important to the work of making disciples? Obviously, that's Jesus' mentality. I came to do the Father's will. That has to be our mentality too. We're here to do the Father's will. Life is not about my will and living life for me. It's not about my self-pleasure. When I truly understand what it means to be a Christian, my loyalty is completely to Christ, and I'm here to do His will. And so I'm at His service. I'm at His bidding. It's not my will, but yours be done, right? Luke 22:42. That has to be our mentality as well. We're going to talk about this one next week. Next week, we're going to think about prayer. So we're going to look at Matthew chapter 9 pretty heavily next week. But the one word I want you to see there in Matthew 9 is just compassion. Jesus had compassion on people who were like sheep without a shepherd. And that's why He took the time to teach them. There's got to be compassion for people who are lost. They need the Lord, and you may be that link. I want to mention this, 2 Timothy chapter 2. We're going to get into this a little bit in our Sunday morning sermon as well, when we think about what it means to be meek. But I just want you to see the qualities there, and we'll just kind of finish up with that, because I think these are qualities that we need to develop out of love for our fellow man. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 24. A servant of the Lord... I lost it. Now I got it. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, and patient. To me, all those things are qualities of love. Gentleness, able to teach is something where you've trained yourself to teach. You've learned. But also patience. And then in humility, correcting those who are in opposition. If God perhaps will grant them repentance so that they may know the truth, and that they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. So this kind of leads us into question 9, where we ask the question, have you ever really made good progress in any conversation by losing your temper and acting harshly and abrasively towards the other person? If you love the people you're trying to teach, you're not going to be screaming in their face. You're not going to be quarreling and combative with them. You're also going to be patient with them in their understanding and their mistakes. And those qualities, I think, are really important, because I have seen people who were trying to be evangelistic, but they were just downright rude and harsh and abrasive and came across like jerks. And I don't think we're going to be very successful in evangelism if we do not speak the truth in love. There's 2 sides to that in Ephesians 4. Speak the truth, but you got to do it in love. And Galatians 6 says, if somebody's overtaken in a trespass, you are spiritual, restore such one in a spirit of gentleness. Be gentle with them. I'll give you an example of I mean, I've seen so many things, but there was a kid that I knew. He was like 21 years old, hadn't obeyed the gospel yet, grown up in the church his whole life, and I think that frustrated probably some people at the church that, why haven't you done it yet? Is that question. And I saw this kid, he was walking out to his car one day, and there was an older guy who was sitting outside saying bye to people as they left, and he yelled at him across a parking lot. I said, "Hey, the water's wet, the water's ready." Yelled at him in front of everybody. And I just looked at this guy's like 80 years old, so it's hard for me to rebuke somebody that's that old, but I thought that is not at all going to be effective in winning him to the gospel. That's exactly the type of attitude 2 Timothy 2 says we can't have. And for me, I felt like I was kind of making headway, and then somebody says something like that that's just rude and embarrassing and humiliating, and it takes you back a step. It actually reverts your progress. So we need to really make sure that we have the attitude of love, really caring about the person that we're teaching, not trying to humiliate or embarrass them. And those qualities in 2 Timothy chapter 2 are very vital so that we can have that. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto you. And you think about that as we teach people. All right. Well, thank you for your participation. Next week,